Assalamu alaikum. My name is Amir Saad Ahmed and my enrollment number is 0117720286 and my presentation topic is political system of UK. Starting from the introduction, the United Kingdom is parliamentary monarchy. It has unwritten constitution consists of statute law, common law and custom and altered by act of parliament and judicial principles and is adaptable to change the political conditions. Now, the monarchy. Monarchy is the oldest form of government in the United Kingdom. In a monarchy, a king or queen is head of the state. The British monarchy is known as constitutional monarchy. The sovereign is head of the state, had the ability to make and pass legislation in the elected parliament. The sovereign is the head of the legislature and judiciary. The British sovereign is head of state and such as in law and head of an integral part of the legislature, head of judiciary, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the crown, and the supreme governor of the established Church of England and Church of Scotland. The executive. The body of ministers headed by a prime minister and dependent on the support of the majority of members of the elected lower house of parliament, the House of Commons. The prime minister who generally leads the political party with the largest number of seats in parliament, the cabinet, which is selected by the prime minister, consists of about ministers. They are usually heads of the government departments. The executive functions of government, although nominally vested in the monarch, are in practice carried out by her or his majesty government, comprising a body of ministers headed by a prime minister and dependent on the support of the majority of members of the elected lower house of parliament, the House of Commons. Normally, this means that the government is formed by the majority party in the Commons and the prime minister is in the leader of the majority party. Now, moving towards Privy Council. There the measures of the Privy Council. They are the advisors of the Sovereign of the United Kingdom. It contains senior politicians who are current or former members of either in the House of Commons or the House of Lords. The Privy Council also advises on the issue of royal proclamations. This group performed all the functions of the government in either small groups which become the King Council or large groups which grew into Privy Council office concerned with the making of orders in council and issuing royal charters. Royal charters. The work on municipal corporations, education, research, and the encouragement of literature, science, and the arts. They work on these things. The council also bears the main responsibility for research through the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research. Now moving towards the legislature. Legislature is the lawmaking branch of a government. Parliament is the supreme legal authority of legislature in UK. Legislature is made by the ministers, jurists and legal experts. The sovereign is head of a state and have power to make and pass legislation in parliament. The British legislature parliament is one of the oldest representative assemblies in the world. It originated in the need of medieval English monarchs to raise the additional finance, mainly prosecute wars. For this, they need the consent initially of the feudal magnates. The barons meeting several times a year in a great council. The first mention of the term parliament in 1236 refers to the meetings of these nobles. Now, moving towards judiciary, England and Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland all have their own legal systems with significant differences in law, organization, and practice. All the three have separation, prosecution, prison, and police services. Scotland's civil court and civil law system differ from the system in England and Wales. Northern Ireland is similar in many ways to that of England and Wales. Common law or judicial precedent, however, is important in all systems. In addition, European Community law depriving from Britain membership of Europe takes precedence over domestic law in certain areas primarily related to the economic and social matters. Now moving towards the Unitary authorities of England. The Unitary Authorities of England are local authorities that are responsible for the provision of all local government services within the district. Each part of the United Kingdom has a district system of local government. Local governments have a very few legislative powers and must act within the framework of laws passed by the central parliament. Local governments in the United Kingdom are responsible for a range of community services including environmental matters, education, highways and traffic, social services, firefighting, sanitation, planning, housing, parks and residential and elections. They are working on these things also. Four of the new unitary authorities of Scottish Borders are Dumfries, Galloway, Fife and Highland. The office of Prime Minister began to develop in 18th century during the administration of Robert Walpole but was not constitutionally recognized until 1905. The Prime Minister, who is formally appointed by the monarch, chooses the government ministers who are usually from the Commons but can also be from the House of Lords and the upper house of Parliament. By modern convention, the Prime Minister, always a member of the Commons and by tradition is also First Lord of the Treasury and Minister for the Civil Services. The Prime Minister is appointed by a monarch of the country, that is by the Queen. The Prime Minister is a very busy person and the leader of the cabinet. The Prime Minister is the advisor of the King in many issues. The Prime Minister is the leader of the House of the Commons also. Now, moving towards the cabinet. The cabinet is the executive committee of the ruling party. It consists of prime minister and ministers who are appointed heads of the cabinet. The cabinet is the executive committee of the ruling party. It consists of prime minister and some ministers who are appointed heads of the more important departments. The cabinet is also the ministry of the government. The British cabinet has a central and pivotal position in the government. The cabinet is formed when new parliament is elected or when the ministry is resigned. My presentation is over here. If anyone have queries, so they may ask.